A rusted chain scraped across the marble floor. A gagged boy whimpered through cracked lips. The stench of horse sweat, wet wool, and fear clung to everything. Later, the guards would say the boys did not cry as they were led through the gates of Edirne. They said the older one, barely a teenager, stared at the high domes of the Ottoman capital with a look that was not quite defiance, but not submission either. After their arrival, the younger child, Radu, reportedly wept when the shackles were removed. He was still small enough to be carried. The older brother, however, did not weep. His name was Vlad. This was the beginning of a captivity that would shape one of Europe's darkest legends. Vlad III, later known as Dracula. Today we reveal the brutal, haunting truth behind how the Ottoman Empire forged a warrior, and then watched in horror as their creation turned against them. But before we step deeper into this forgotten corridor of history, if stories like this awaken something in you, a fascination with the darker truths, the untold legacies, the shadows that shaped empires, then I invite you to tap that like button and subscribe for more journeys into the hidden past. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you joining me from? I'm always amazed by how these long-buried tales are being rediscovered by curious minds across the globe. All of us connected by a hunger to understand the world, not just as it was told, but as it truly was. It was 1442 when the boy prince Vlad arrived at the Ottoman court. His father, Vlad II Dracul, had been forced to swear fealty to Sultan Murad II. As a sign of that submission, he surrendered 2 of his sons as guarantees. The term used by the Ottomans was collateral hostages, a common practice, an ugly one, but rarely did collateral become curse. Historians still debate whether Vlad II believed his sons would be treated kindly. The Ottomans had long used hostage princes in their sprawling imperial project. Some were even elevated to wealth and power. But Edirne was no nursery. It was a forge. The boys were taken across the Danube in the dead of winter, cold that burns like hot iron. Vlad was around 11, Radu, a toddler by comparison. They were handed over to Turkish guards at Gallipoli, then paraded on horseback across Anatolia. By the time they reached the palace, they were no longer sons. They were symbols. The Ottoman court did not hide this fact. A carved inscription above the gatehouse to one of the inner training grounds read simply, "Only the faithful shall return." That wasn't about piety, it was a warning. The palace where they were housed stood near the Tunka River. Its gardens bloomed with narcissus and hyacinth, perfumed and lovely. But at night, when the court fell silent and the guards rotated, the walls echoed with another sound, drills, whips, the panting breath of boys running in circles until they vomited. Vlad was housed not with the nobles, but with other divsurm, Christian boys taken from their homes and converted to Islam to serve in the Sultan's elite corps. But unlike the divsurm, Vlad wasn't there to be absorbed into the Ottoman body. He was there to be held, tamed ideally. Still, the routines were the same. Morning prayers, swordplay, horseback archery, lessons in Arabic, Turkish, Persian, geometry and rhetoric, how to count the angles of a fort wall, how to disembowel a man without dulling your blade. The tutors were brutal. Some were eunuchs. One was a Persian scholar who, according to one Turkish chronicler, preferred to teach by cane rather than by scroll. A fringe account from a captured Wallachian prisoner claims that Vlad's tutor once beat him until he lost hearing in one ear, though this remains unverified. The boys were not starved, but they were always hungry. The Ottoman philosophy of education was Spartan in all but name. Meat twice a week, flatbread, olives, watered wine. Discipline was everything. One misstep could lead to flogging. 2 to the dungeon. It was in one such dungeon, beneath the tiled halls of Edirne, that Vlad spent 3 nights after he refused to recite Quran verses. He emerged bloodied and silent, refusing food for days. When he finally ate again, he requested lamb, raw. There is no record of whether he was converted to Islam. Some argue he merely pretended. Others insist he believed for a time, then renounced it later. One German pamphlet from the 1480s even suggests he carved crosses into his forearms as a child, so the Prophet's touch would not enter him. Almost certainly apocryphal, but the image lingered. He grew fast. His limbs hardened with muscle. His cheekbones sharpened. By his 15th birthday, Vlad was already a formidable horseman. One court witness described him as a quiet shadow among louder boys, always watching, rarely laughing. Yet the real transformation came not in the yard, but in the silence between lessons. Vlad watched how the Ottoman elite moved, how they flattered, how they betrayed. He watched eunuchs beg for favor from military commanders. He watched viziers disappear after whispered rumors. He watched how the powerful cloaked threats in silk. It was not brute strength the Ottomans taught him. It was control, the kind that wraps itself in civility, the kind that knows exactly when to break a man. But something else was brewing, an ulcer perhaps, a slow, festering resentment that boiled deeper than politics. The Turkish archives from the time say little about young Vlad's disposition, but there is one curious note in a 1444 ledger, an incident involving a training sword, a knocked-out tooth, and a servant who disrespected the prince's honor. The servant lived, but never spoke again. One fringe source, a Venetian merchant's letter smuggled from Gallipoli, claims that Vlad once caught a sparrow, snapped its neck, and offered it to a tutor as a lesson in loyalty. Another version has him carving the word Drakel into the wall of his cell with the bird's beak. All this could be myth, or it could be the origin story of something far worse. Meanwhile, his younger brother Radu thrived. Blonde-haired, handsome, and reportedly eager to please, Radu converted willingly. He earned the nickname Radu Selfirmos, Radu the Beautiful. He sang Ottoman poetry, danced, courted favor. Eventually, he would become a favored companion of the Sultan's heir, Mehmed. But Vlad did not dance. He listened, and he waited. The Ottomans believed they had turned a dangerous son into a useful servant. What they had actually done was teach a snake to grow fangs. The sound of steel rang out every morning before the call to prayer. Cold air, bare feet on packed sand, boys in loose tunics lined up with training sabers, striking in unison until their hands blistered. Then again with the other hand, again with blindfolds, again in silence. It was here, among the rows of sweating captives, that Vlad honed the art of movement, sudden, exact, economical. While others flailed or struck wildly, he observed, corrected, improved. A tutor once whispered, "He does not fight like a boy. He fights like a clock that wants to kill you." By the age of 16, Vlad was being trained not just in swordplay, but in Ottoman siegecraft, cavalry formations, and torture law. Yes, law. The Ottomans believed that cruelty was justified so long as it was measured. Vlad read from thick Arabic volumes on punishment, which described everything from tongue removal to impalement. It is not known when the fascination began, but it began early. There was a lesson once where students were asked to describe the ideal execution method for a rebellious noble. Most boys scribbled predictable answers. Hanging, decapitation. Vlad's response was only 3 words. Make it public. The palace instructors were not disturbed. Quite the opposite. They praised him for strategic clarity. Later, when a minor Albanian prince was executed for insubordination, Vlad was among those invited to observe. A rope strangulation, nothing too bloody. But Vlad did not flinch. Some said he barely blinked. And then there were the whips. Discipline at the Edirne barracks was enforced by senior janissaries with lacquered rods. Any error, mispronounced phrase, misstep in formation, disrespect to the prophet, was met with pain. While Radu cried under the lash and clung to the robes of instructors, Vlad endured in silence. Once, after refusing to kneel for prayer, he was lashed 17 times. When asked afterward if he regretted his disobedience, he replied, "I regret you counted the blows." This stoicism unnerved some of his handlers. It wasn't bravado. It was cold, precise resistance. And it grew darker by the year. Not that he was completely isolated. Among the boys, Vlad made strange alliances. One janissary trainee, a Greek convert named Basilios, became a sort of companion. They sparred together, whispered during meal breaks. But Basilios would later tell a merchant, he never spoke of home, only of debts. What Vlad learned in Edirne was more than combat. He absorbed the rhythm of power. From the Grand Viziers, he learned how to listen without revealing anything. From the palace eunuchs, how to disguise rage with civility. From the janissary officers, how to command men through terror alone. One day, during a military lesson on sapping, undermining castle walls by digging tunnels. Vlad reportedly asked, "And if there is no wall, do we build one just to bring it down?" His instructor laughed, then paused. The question was too clever. Historians still argue whether these stories are embellishments written backward from Dracula's reign. It's possible, but even Ottoman chroniclers admitted that the boy from Wallachia learned quickly and watched as if recording every insult. He also watched as Radu began to rise. Radu, ever the favorite, had grown popular with Mehmed, the Sultan's son. They rode together, read poetry together. The rumor, unspoken but widely believed, was that they shared more than words. Whether true or not, Radu's proximity to the Ottoman heir was dangerous, not because it threatened Vlad politically, but because it added one more betrayal to his ledger. When a visiting envoy from Wallachia arrived in Edirne to speak with the Sultan, Vlad was not permitted to attend. Radu was. That night, Vlad broke the nose of another boy in training. No provocation, no explanation, just a single sudden blow. He was locked in solitary confinement for 4 days. When he emerged, his left hand trembled slightly, but his eyes did not. It was around this time that something inside him hardened irreversibly. He began to obsess over impalement. One fringe report, buried in the diary of a Serbian translator, claims that Vlad once snuck into a medical dissection being conducted on a hanged criminal. He asked the doctor how long it would take a body to die if a stake were inserted without touching the lungs. The doctor replied, "It depends on whether you oil the wood." Years later, when asked why impalement was his preferred method of execution, Vlad allegedly responded, "Because it lasts." Back in Edirne, the palace continued shaping him. His command of Turkish became flawless. He could recite long verses of the Quran with ease. Even if, privately, he still carved Christian crosses into soft wood. He memorized lines of Persian court etiquette, learned the taste of saffron, of roasted sheep's brain, of honeyed yogurt thickened with poppy. He watched a palace cook smear crocodile dung on his feet as sunscreen. Not uncommon in the Ottoman elite, an old Egyptian trick. Vlad found it absurd, but he noted it, because he noted everything. Not all his memories were cruel. Once, when an eclipse darkened the sky over Edirne, the boys were released from training early. Radu danced in the shadow light. Vlad stood beneath a fig tree and whispered to no one. Even the sun hides its face. When word came in 1447 that Vlad's father had been murdered in Wallachia, and his elder brother buried alive by Hungarian-aligned nobles, Vlad did not cry. He asked only one question. Did they suffer? The Ottoman court, sensing opportunity, began preparing him for release. They had raised a foreign prince in the image of the empire. Educated, fluent, brutal. Their goal was to install him as a Wallachian puppet, a loyal vassal who would keep the border stable and the taxes flowing. A controllable warrior. But what they had truly created was a precision instrument sharpened by humiliation and memory. Vlad had been forged in their image, but he would serve no one. The morning they dressed him for departure, Vlad did not smile. He was nearly 20 now. Taller, leaner, a thin scar running from the corner of his mouth down to his jaw, origin unrecorded. His hands were calloused from sword work, his Turkish flawless, his gaze unreadable. He wore Ottoman robes trimmed in gold thread. A gift, they said, a show of confidence from the Sultan. He bowed to no one as he left Edirne. By then, the court believed they had succeeded. They had taken a volatile boy and turned him into a diplomatic tool. A refined, multilingual warrior with just enough brutality to control his homeland. Radu would remain behind, still the darling of Mehmed's court. Vlad, meanwhile, would be sent into Wallachia, backed by Ottoman support, with clear instructions: be firm, be loyal, and remember who shaped you. But they misunderstood what they had shaped. The Wallachia Vlad returned to was not the one he had left. His father's alliances had crumbled. Boyars, Wallachian nobles, had played kingmaker, choosing favorites, toppling them, then crying foul when the Hungarians or Ottomans retaliated. The mountains had gone wild with bandits. The throne itself was less a seat than a trapdoor. Vlad arrived with Ottoman troops flanking him, his return bought not by popular demand, but by imperial convenience. They thought he would serve, but Vlad never forgot that he had once been chained. From the moment he stepped foot on Wallachian soil, something changed in him. Witnesses noted how he touched the ground before dismounting, then stood silent for a long time. No prayer, just a breath. He then entered the capital, Targovist, with no celebration. The people did not cheer. They watched. Warily. He was a foreign prince in a familiar land. His accent had shifted. His manners were Ottoman. But his eyes, those had not changed. They were still the eyes of a boy who had once been beaten for saying the wrong prayer. The boyars summoned him. They wanted to know his intentions. He gave them a banquet. It is recorded that at this banquet, held in a wide hall hung with deer antlers and faded banners, Vlad appeared in rich robes but ate sparingly. He asked each boyar to recount how many princes they had served. One said 2, another 4. One old man boasted of having outlived 7. Vlad said nothing. He only nodded. 3 days later, that same hall would host another banquet, though this time, the guests did not leave. This was his first great act of theatrical violence. He invited dozens of boyars to a feast, served them wine, listened to their boasts, and then had them seized, bound, and marched into the hills. Most were worked to death rebuilding an old fortress. Some were impaled on stakes just outside the city. The Ottomans were not alarmed. Not yet. They saw it as pragmatism. A prince eliminating internal rivals. Not unusual. Not alarming. In fact, Mehmed himself had ordered executions far more bloody. But there was a difference. Mehmed executed for control. Vlad executed for memory. He began ordering purification of the roads, meaning he sent soldiers to round up thieves, vagrants, and dissenters, and display their bodies on spikes near the mountain passes. A crude form of signage. Wallachia is not yours. He restored the tax rolls, rebuilt certain collapsed fortresses, and issued laws mandating church attendance and trade tithes. These too were Ottoman in flavor. But his methods weren't Ottoman. They were Vlad's. One report, likely embellished, claims he had a silver goblet placed in the center of a village well, left there overnight. It was still there in the morning. Another tale tells of a merchant who shortchanged a local customer. Vlad allegedly had the man disemboweled and strung upside down with his purse sewn into his stomach. The Ottomans began to take notice. They sent envoys, courteous, curious. One, a Persian diplomat, noted Vlad's growing isolation. His court had no poets. His dinners were silent. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was to issue instructions or orders. Radu, still in Edirne, sent letters. Some were warm. Some were veiled threats. Vlad answered none of them. He instead turned his eyes toward the Danube. He began fortifying the Wallachian side of the river, increased patrols, recruited men from the mountain tribes, even reopened correspondence with the Hungarian regent, John Hunyadi, once his father's enemy. Hunyadi had executed Vlad's older brother. Vlad didn't care. Politics, he had learned in Edirne, is not about loyalty. It is about leverage. The Ottomans invited him to the court again. He declined. Mehmed, now Sultan, sent richer gifts. He returned them unopened. They had trained him to be a blade. And now, he was turning that blade away from its master. One Ottoman official wrote, "We gave him silk." He returned sharpened wood. Still, no one in Edirne believed Vlad would rebel openly. He was one man, after all. A minor prince. No army to rival theirs. No treasury to bribe nobles. No standing allies. But they forgot one thing. He had learned from them not just how to kill, but how to stage it. One by one, he began to send messages, not words, but signs. A row of Turkish prisoners, heads shaved, noses sliced off, left just beyond the southern checkpoint of Nicopolis. A merchant caravan ambushed, their tongues nailed to a tree. A note pinned to one chest. "I have not forgotten your lessons." Still, the Ottomans underestimated him. One scholar later wrote, "It was not the size of his army that troubled the Sultan. It was the sense that Vlad was no longer acting out of ambition, but out of calculation. He had studied their playbook, memorized it, and now he was writing his own." The final warning came in the form of a gift. A polished Turkish turban. Inside it, a severed ear. No note, just the symbol of a man who had once been taught to bow, and now bowed to no one. The first true break came not with a scream, but with a silence. It was 1461. A trade caravan vanished crossing into Wallachia from Ottoman lands. 30 men, 6 wagons, livestock, textiles, silver. Nothing returned. No bodies. No letters. No excuses. Mem sent an inquiry. Vlad replied, "I found nothing to return." This was not just defiance. It was theater. And so began the season of disappearances. Over the next 2 years, the Ottomans lost more than 300 men in Wallachian territory. Soldiers, tax agents, diplomats, most never seen again. A few were returned different, mutilated, mute, always alone. Then, one morning, an Ottoman border fortress awoke to a sight so grotesque it would be remembered for centuries. On the hill opposite the Danube, a forest of stakes. Men, women, horses, even children, impaled at various heights, arranged in spirals, in rows, in grotesque patterns like an artist composing a message in blood. Over 20,000 corpses, if Ottoman accounts are to be believed. Some fresh, some rotting, some, horrifically, still twitching. At the center, raised above the rest, was an Ottoman pasha. His robes soaked, his mouth held open with a spike. No letter accompanied the display. No formal declaration of war. It didn't need one. This was how Vlad declared himself. Historians still debate whether the number, 20,000, is true. Some claim Ottoman scribes exaggerated to justify Mem's military campaign. But even conservative estimates agree. The carnage was massive, and it was designed to be seen. This was not cruelty for chaos. It was a calculated psychological campaign. Vlad had learned it, piece by piece, in Edirne. From the gold-threaded silence of the court to the religious lessons backed by whips. He had watched how the empire controlled minds. Now he was using those methods against them, only without their restraint. When Mehmed finally crossed the Danube in 1462, it wasn't with envoys, it was with an army. Over 90,000 troops, siege engines, janissaries, elite cavalry. But what they found was not a standing army. It was a phantom. Wallachia had become a wasteland. Villages burned to the foundation. Wells poisoned. Crops salted. Towns emptied. The people, those not massacred or deported, had fled into the mountains or been ordered by Vlad himself to disappear into forests. His own capital, Targovist, was deserted. Not a soul, except for the impaled. The same spiral of bodies. The same stench. Some scholars suggest that Vlad's own scouts lured Ottoman officers ahead of the army just to witness it in advance, so their fear would spread faster than their feet. Even the hardened janissaries balked. One Ottoman chronicler wrote, "We marched through a land that rejected life. Even the wind carried screams." What was left of the Ottoman advance became bogged down in swamps and ambushes. Vlad's forces never fought directly. They attacked at night, with fire and blade, vanishing before the next scream. He poisoned rivers, released diseased cattle into the roads, slaughtered his own captured scouts so they could not betray him under torture. It was here, in the nightmare landscapes of his homeland, that Vlad became something else. Not just a prince, not a tyrant, a lesson. One Ottoman captain, captured and later released, said he dreamed of Vlad's face for a year. Not from seeing it in battle, but from never seeing it and knowing it was there. The Sultan, for all his rage, began to pull back. He left a force behind. Radu, Vlad's own brother, at its head, charming, loyal, raised in Edirne to be the correct version of Wallachian obedience. It was a cruel twist. The golden sun sent to remove the serpent. But Vlad was no longer hiding. He began sending letters to European leaders, mathematically crafted reports describing his war against the Turks, always emphasizing one thing. He had learned their methods. And now they regretted it. Even Pope Pius II received one such letter, describing with unsettling precision how impalement prevented the spread of disease by elevating the corpse away from rats. The Pope is said to have wept, not out of horror but admiration. "If only he were one of us," he whispered. But even admiration cannot shield one from betrayal. As Ottoman support for Radu grew, Vlad found himself isolated. The mountain lords were tired of war. Peasants fled further north. And Hungary, his one-time ally, turned on him. He was captured while seeking assistance, held in a castle cell for years. The Ottomans did not gloat. They had seen what he had built from their training. They had walked the roads he littered with their soldiers. They had seen what it meant to raise a wolf and then turn your back. And so they left him there. No execution, no victory parade, just stone walls and fading torchlight. A fringe source claims that even in prison, he sharpened sticks. Not for escape, but for memory. Eventually, he was released, European politics shifting again. He reclaimed his throne briefly, ruled for months. Then in winter he died. How exactly remains uncertain. Some say in battle, others assassinated by his own men. A handful believe he simply vanished into the forests that once shielded him. But when Mehmed learned of Vlad's death, he reportedly said only this: "The lesson is over. May God forgive the teacher." After his death, it took days before anyone dared approach the site of Vlad's last battle. Snow had fallen. The forests north of Bucharest stood silent. No birds, no distant dogs, only the muffled hush of winter blanketing corpses. They found his body partially buried beneath frozen mud and brush, still wearing the crest of Wallachia. A dragon curled in iron across his chest, its fangs stained with blood. His head, however, was missing. Radu, now installed as Ottoman-backed voivode, had it sent to Mehmed in Constantinople. The Sultan did not display it publicly. He did not hang it from a gate. Instead, it is said he kept the head in a jar of honey, stored in a private vault. A relic, not a trophy. The price of a lesson once taught in blood and betrayal. And yet the story did not end there. Even in death, Vlad refused to rest quietly. Peasants whispered that he had not died at all, that he had ridden into the Carpathians and would return when the forests grew dark enough. Hungarian monks claimed to have seen his ghost walking the battlements of Visegrad prison. One Ottoman officer, mad from fever, insisted that he saw Vlad's face in a fire and that it smiled. But beneath the folklore, one truth remained. The Ottomans had made him. They had bound him, beaten him, trained him, refined him, and then loosed him into a land already steeped in suspicion and violence. They thought he would be manageable, predictable, moldable. Instead, they birthed something else. Not just a ruler, a revenant of vengeance. The impalements, the massacres, the letters scrawled in dried blood. None of it was madness, as later Western stories would claim. It was message. Each act was an echo of what had been done to him. Each spike a reply to an insult carved deep into memory. There is a note in the memoir of a Turkish court scribe who served Mehmed. What we taught him, he did not forget. What we showed him, he did not forgive. Even Wallachians feared him. He had no allies, only subjects. He ruled not through love or lineage, but through awe, and awe, once shattered, is dangerous. Some scholars believe his final downfall came not because of Ottoman interference or Hungarian betrayal, but because his own people could no longer survive the weight of fear. Vlad did not distinguish between enemy and obstacle. He had learned the Ottoman definition of loyalty, obedience or oblivion, and returned it to the world sharpened. And still, there were curious contradictions. He rebuilt churches, donated to monasteries, claimed divine sanction for his rule. He dressed in black not as mourning, but as a signal. He was the shadow in which power moved. Not godless, but beyond priesthood. He dined sparingly, spoke rarely, smiled never. A Wallachian chronicler once described him as a man who looked at others as though calculating whether they were worth killing. Quirky details, too, linger. Vlad reportedly insisted on drinking water only from springs he had personally seen, fearing poison. He mistrusted birds, especially owls, claiming they carried the dreams of the dead. And in his later years, he banned mirrors from his residence entirely. Not out of vanity, but because, he said, there are things I must never look at again. Today, we know him as Dracula, a name made myth by novelists and nightmares. But long before fiction took hold, long before capes and coffins, there was the man shaped in chains, raised by the empire that would come to fear him, crafted in gold and fire and silence, taught not mercy but memory. He was not the first hostage prince, but he may be the last who made the empire regret taking him. So we end not in fire but in frost. The snow fell quietly that year, softening the jagged soil of Wallachia, blurring the lines between battlefield and grave. The wind no longer carried screams, only the slow breath of a land exhaling. Vlad's story does not offer comfort. It does not arc toward redemption or justice. It ends with silence. And yet, in that silence, something lingers. Perhaps it is a warning. That power taught through cruelty cannot be undone. That the minds sharpened in darkness may one day return with edges the teachers cannot dull. That a child taught to kneel may one day rise, and make others kneel instead. We look back on stories like this not because they soothe us, but because they remind us how close we stand to the edge. How thin the line can be between governance and terror, loyalty and obedience, rule and revenge. But for now, let the tale rest. Let the forests regrow. Let the snow fall. Let the dragon banner fade under moss and ash. The lesson has been carved, not in books, but in memory. If you've made it this far, thank you for walking this dark road with me.